Hey, I'm Theo, and thank you for joining me. Today we got our very first tier list, and it will be about legendary spells. Now, you might already see there are no quests, because, yeah, well, they may be technically spells, it's kind of a different category, so I won't be including them here. Now, I'll be judging these cards by mostly their peak, when they were the strongest. I'll also be looking more at the context of the card, when were they played, why were they played. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe. Now let's get started with the very first legendaries from the Boomsday. First up we have Floop's Glorious Gloop. And yeah, if you just look at its time in Standard, you might be thinking, that's unplayable, maybe niche. But yeah, after a while it got rotated to Wild, and after a while it got some better cards in Wild, especially with a card like Skills of Onyxia, or other cards that generated a lot of tokens, and yeah, that made this card pretty broken. That version was where you gained mana crystals every time you died, and not a refresh like the current one. Yeah, you basically got like infinite mana of this card sometimes, and yeah, we all know what Druid can do with infinite mana. It was broken for quite a while in Wild, but because it was like unplayable basically in Standard for so long, I think I'm just gonna put it in the great tier. Now next up we have the Solarium. Now this card still sees play in Wild. Saw a lot of play in Standard as well. I mean, it's 1 mana draw 3, really great if you wanna quickly go through your deck, great for combo decks, great for aggro decks. So yeah, I mean, let's just put it in a great tier, right? Because it doesn't really make anything broken, but yeah, it's just a great card for Warlock. And then next up we have Myra's Unstable Element, and yeah, this card, yeah, this deck it was in, like Tempo Rogue was top tier for quite a while in Rise of Shadows, I believe. Also, it enabled like Nomi Rogue, where yeah, you play this one, you play Nomi, Shadows Death and Nomi, get a board full of 6/6s for a couple of turns, and that's usually won the game. Now, where should I put it? Like, I think it's again another great card. Like, it enabled those decks. And well, yeah, later on it might have become worse, but I think it still was a great card. Enabled a lot of stuff and made those rogue decks a lot better. Then next up we have the Stormbringer for Shaman, and yeah, this feels a little bit like a wave of nostalgia we have right now. But it was a legendary 6 mana, but it did only hit your minions. It also got buffed. It used to be 7 mana and went to 6. Overall, I think, yeah, it didn't really see a lot of play. I think it's all a bit of play with a deck like had like Voltaic Burst, I believe it was, to get some cheap tokens, kind of similar to what Shaman does now. But overall, yeah, it wasn't played too much, so I think it's just going in the niche tier. Then next up, we have Flark's Boomzuka, and yeah, another card that got buffed. It used to be 8 mana. Now it's 7 mana, but yeah, I don't think it really helped the card very much. I don't think it ever really saw play. It required way too much deck building for this to work, and all it did was, yeah, just summon them. They attacked and then they died, so you had to be very specific, so you had to make your deck worse just for this card, and yeah, I think that just really wasn't worth it. So yeah, I think this card was pretty unplayable. Now next up we have Kangor's Endless Army, and yeah, I think for quite a while this card was pretty unplayable. Wasn't enough mech decks, but I think eventually this card got a bit more support, especially because you kept the magnetic part. Yeah, you could build a few big mechs and then yeah, resummon them with this. So that's pretty good, but yeah, I don't feel like it was played for too long, so I'm gonna put it again in the niche tier. Now next up we have Luna's Pocket Galaxy, and yeah, it's 7 mana here, but yeah, at some point they buffed it to 5 mana, I think the same patch with Stormbringer, and maybe even Flark's Boomzuka. But yeah, at 5 mana, this card was absolutely broken. Like, it dominated the meta, dominated the tournaments it was played in, especially because back then it was a specialist tournament, so you could only bring one deck. So yeah, some tournaments, like half the field, just brought Mage deck with Luna's Pocket Galaxy. And yeah, eventually they kind of regretted the buff to it, and they unbuffed it back to 7 mana. But I think overall, though, because of that period where it was just absolutely dominating the meta, it should go into the broken tier. Then we have the Boom Ship. Yeah, this card didn't really see a lot of play. I think it only saw play in like a Mechathun Warrior deck. There wasn't really a lot of support otherwise for this card. But yeah, Mechathun Warrior was a bit of a meta player for a little bit, where yeah, you played Mechathun and Malygos. You drew your whole deck, played every other card besides maybe one minion. You played the Boom Ship, and then you summoned Malygos. Mechathune. You played in a range of both cards for 6 damage because you had the Malagos, you played Robot, and then you won the game. Yeah, a lot of setup. Nowadays, yeah, that would be pretty much unplayable. Way too much setup, no redundancy. But yeah, it was actually player because it did beat like slower decks because it drew pretty fast. But yeah, overall, pretty niche. And so it goes into that tier. Now, next up, we have one of my favorite cards, the Xerax Cloning Gallery. It was also a bit played in the Big Priest, but mostly in like Clone Priest, that's what it was called. And yeah, this card summoned the 1/1s of copies. So yeah, what do you want to do, of course? Play expensive cards that have big effects on the card, and not like stuff like Battle Cries. So what you had was stuff like a Velen Malygos and a Radiant Elemental for the OTK version of the deck. Where, yeah, if you summoned all of those, you basically had 0 mana Mind Blast deal 20, a Smite deal 14 for 0 mana, and yeah, that wins pretty fast, but it required you basically to not draw all those cards. The other version is the one I played a lot, even got ranked 1 legend with it. That's the version where you also played stuff like Lyra, you played stuff like Witchwood Grizzly versus aggro, and yeah, it was a lot more flexible, and you really had to figure out your game plan and how to make that work. So sometimes you won with value through Lyra and Radiant Elemental and just play a lot of cards for 0 mana. Sometimes you won with the OTK if you got very lucky, and sometimes you won by just like resummoning your Witchwood Grizzly against aggro. Overall though, I think it wasn't quite a meta player for too long, or actually dominating, although I think the deck was a bit underrated, so I'm just gonna put it in a good tier though. Pretty close to great. Now, those are all the cards from the Boomsday. The next legendary spell took a while, but it was with the Demon Hunter launch with Ashes of Outland. And I think also the other two were, the next two were with that expansion. Then we have Metamorphosis. Now this card has gone through a few changes. First of all, it was a 5 mana deal 5 damage card. Then because Demon Hunter was pretty broken for quite a while, it got nerfed to 5 mana deal 4. Then it got rotated to Wild, but it also came back to Standard again, and this time it was another version with 4 mana deal 5. It got nerfed, but I think overall, yeah, it was just a good card overall. It's still a good card, but yeah, even though it got buffed, it's not even crazy good, which is kind of strange because it's basically 6 mana Pyroblast, but yeah, that's the way we are right now, so I'm gonna put it in the good tier. Now, next up, we have Evocation. This card also eventually got nerfed to 2 mana, but I think it was 1 mana for quite a while. And yeah, you could get a full hand with spells. Sometimes it was great, sometimes it was pretty bad. It also enabled stuff in Vault, like Quest Mage. Overall, though, I didn't think it broke anything really in Standard. So yeah, just a good card overall, so that's where I'll be putting it. Then next up, we have the Soul Mirror. And yeah, this card pretty much defined the priest for as long as it was in Standard, or at least control priest. It's yeah, a pretty crazy clear, especially when you discovered it. Back when this was meta, I think you still had the discover rules, where it was 3 or 4 times more likely to discover a class card compared to neutral cards. So yeah, you saw this card quite often with stuff like Renew, and yeah, really, really powerful. Sometimes you got nice effects, Death Rattles, all that kind of stuff, so really, really good. Should I put it in Broken? Like, it feels pretty close to Broken. You know, I'm just gonna put it in Broken. This was, yeah, so good. It made Control Priest work, I think, and yeah, I'm gonna put in Broken, barely, but I think I'm gonna put it there. Now, next up from the Darkmoon Faire, we have 2 deck cards, basically. First of all, we have a deck of Lunacy, and yeah, this card was pretty insane in Standard. At this point, I think we still had 2 mana Incantus Flow, because yeah, I think it was printed with Stormwind, but it didn't quite have the support yet. But with a card like Deck of Lunacy, Spellmage got the extra support, and this made the deck pretty crazy. Yeah, you play this on 2 or even 1, and yeah, you just you got that crazy deck. You got to play stuff like Nagrand Slam for 7 mana from your Mask of Cthulhu, I think it was. Or your cheap cards became like 5 mana cards that often drew cards, and it was just incredibly strong. And yeah, often won the game when you played it on turn 1 or turn 2, especially if you played the Incantus Flow afterwards to even make the spells cheaper. But yeah, overall, yeah, I think it was pretty broken. It had to get nerfed to 4 mana. I mean, 2 mana nerfs are pretty rare, so I think we gotta put it here in the in the broken tier. Because, yeah, it was just very, very good. Even at 4 mana, it still saw a bit of play, but yeah, 2 mana, absolutely crazy card. Now, next up, we have the Deck of Chaos, and yeah, this is quite the opposite of Deck of Lunacy, where it swapped the attack and mana of the card, and yeah, people try to make this work in like a deck with like a Malygos Warlock, where yeah, you get a 4 mana Malygos, and yeah, it never really works. Like, it basically required you to not draw Malygos, play this card, then draw it, and get your damage spells, and your other cards also had to not get affected by it. And yeah, it just never really worked out. Well, it's gotta be put in an unplayable tier then. Now next up we have Tamsin's Phylactery from March of the Lich King. And yeah, this card mostly enabled combo decks, like a Bomb Warlock, a Mine Warlock, where yeah, you just build a full board with imps, then gave them Death Rattle of Mine. They died during the game, and you killed them off and they all dealt 4 damage, or well 8, because yeah, Tamsin as well. Yeah, 56 damage that won most matchups. But yeah, this card enabled the deck and was a pretty strong deck. I really hated facing it. It's just some of those solitaire decks. And yeah, that's why I'm going to put it in a great tier. Just enabled those combo decks. It didn't really enable too much else. Just too expensive for that, I think, from what I remember. But yeah, enabling those combo decks puts it in a great tier. Now, the next up we have the Scourge, the March of the Lich King as well, when Death Knight launched. And this card, yeah, I don't think it ever really saw play in any decks, even in Unholy Death Knights, because yeah, you kind of wanted to win faster, you want to get that board early and then finish off the opponent with Grave Strength. And yeah, this card, yeah, it gets you a full board, but it's pretty random what you get. Pretty much unplayable, I think it was. Yeah, maybe it was great to discover sometimes, because in slower matchups you wanted that board, but overall, yeah, I don't think you ever really wanted to play that card. Next up we have the Shadow of Demise, a card that doesn't actually have a mana cost, pretty rare, because yeah, it transformed into the previous card you played. And yeah, that's pretty strong, especially in Rogue, when you have some powerful cards like Shadow Step, and I'd say Prep, but this didn't synergize too well with Preparation. Helped out Rogue a lot, it just gave you what you wanted, either maybe another Eviscerate for more burst, another Garrote I think you could get, and whatever you needed, this could double up on it. And yeah, it was pretty great in those decks, so that's why I'm going to put it in that tier. Now next up we have the Sunwhale. I think it was the free legendary you got with March of the Lich King before it launched. And yeah, overall this got played in a bunch of decks. You could add it to decks for like extra value. Yeah, it was, if you had a full hand, it was 0 mana gain a random spell, which wasn't too good, but sometimes in longer matchups you could use this and just get a ton of value out of your Sunwhale. Like your other cards, right, just get you a full hand of random spells and lets you keep going for quite a while. Overall, though, it wasn't actually broken or anything, right? You actually had to pay mana to discover those cards, or random cards, so you often ended up with a bunch of terrible cards in your hand. But overall, I think it was a good card. Just saw play in a bunch of decks. It was pretty flexible where you could add it. So, good overall. Now, next up, we have Infinitize the Maxitude, and yeah, this card initially didn't have the mana reduction on it, and yeah, didn't really see much play, even though it really is infinite value. 2 mana to just discover 1 card. It's pretty slow. However, with the buff, with 1 mana reduction, got a bit better. Especially because in those longer matchups, yeah, you could keep going and going, discover stuff like Elemental Inspiration over and over in win those long matchups, or get extra burst, get reverberations to enable Civ combos. So overall, yeah, pretty good card. I don't think it ever was like broken in terms of win rates or anything, or great even. So I'm just going to put it in a good tier. Just a good card to have overall. I think you never really hated having it, but also it was rare that it was really amazing in matchups. Now then we have Bounce Around Feed Garona. And this card, yeah, before the release of this, people thought this might be very broken. And yeah, I thought it was going to be either broken or unplayable. It's one of those cards. Fortunately, it's more towards the unplayable part. However, it did see a little bit of play in Vault with some combo decks, especially with Scabs and Spirit of the Shark, I think. And in Standard, I think it saw a tiny bit of play as well, enabling combos again, of course. So yeah, I'm gonna put it in a niche tier. Pretty close to unplayable, I'd say, but it did see a little bit of play, so I think we gotta put it 1 tier higher than unplayable. Now next up we have the Love Everlasting, the Priest card from Festival Legends. Pretty good, so playing a lot of Priest decks and running a bunch of spells. It enables combo decks. It was good in control decks, or it still is even though there's not a lot of control around now. But yeah, it allowed you to play like your board clears earlier. For example, you could go turn 3 this card, and then you could play turn 4 Harmonic Pop already to clear those early boards from the opponent. So yeah, just great overall. Helped combo decks, helped slower decks, control decks. Just great overall. Gonna put it in that tier for that reason. Then next up we have Starlight Groove, and yeah, this card gives you a Divine Shield, but yeah, you never really wanted to put in any deck. Often maybe in decks you wanted to put it in. You didn't have enough holy spells. Yeah, it's easy to proc, right? Just 1 damage and the shield is gone. And for 3 mana, that's just not good enough. And yeah, it never saw play, so unplayable. Now next up we have Going Down Swinging, and at 5 mana, I think this was already a good card. Like, does exactly what Demon Hunter wants to do, or gets enabled by it with the attack buffs. So yeah, a really easy board clear for Demon Hunter. Like, you have a lot of cheap attack buffs. This pretty much can clear any board, and if something is left, you can hit it while being immune, or just go face with it. And then they buffed it to 4 mana, which I don't really get. Like, it was already good. But yeah, at 4 mana now, it's pretty great. Just an easy board clear while even being able to push face damage while doing what you want to do. So yeah, I think I'm gonna put it for that reason in the great tier. And then next up we have a Rhythm and Roots. Drew choose 1 spell, but yeah, did anybody ever really pick the second option of summoning 8/8s in 4 turns out of sight of Yogg casting it? I don't think so. It's pretty much always summoning those 5/5s. I don't think there's ever a reason to go for the 8/8s. But yeah, still the 5/5s. Yeah, it's a lot of stats for 4 mana, but in the modern Hearthstone, spending 4 mana on doing nothing for 3 turns, I mean, you can see it with Slackmaw as well. Like, you just can't do that. And that's what it makes unplayable, even if you get it randomly. Unless you got it like super early with a card like, I think, Planted Evidence, that's what it was called. Only then it was maybe playable, but yeah, that's this cover, and this is when you want to put it in your deck. So yeah, just unplayable. Not really something you want to put in your deck. Now next up we have Black Rock and Roll. This card, yeah, I think people have been trying really this card to make this work for a long time, ever since Festival of Legends, but yeah, I don't think it ever really worked. Like, I don't think this card has ever been competitive. Like, yeah, there's been decks with it, but overall, yeah, I don't think it's enabled anything. We got some new cards recently as well to help this out, but yeah, it just never saw play, because all it does is buff cards in your deck, so yeah, you have to play this, have the right cards in your deck, and then draw those cards. And only then you start generating the value of it. But yeah, it takes a while. 5 mana doing nothing the same turn. It's just not doable in this meta. So yeah, I'm gonna put it on playable, though I guess it's pretty close to niche tier, but yeah, I don't think this card has ever been competitive. Now then we have a Jive Insect. Yeah, this card by itself, I don't think it ever really saw much play. Like, yeah, it's a cheaper Ragnaros, but Ragnaros doesn't see play either and isn't even close to seeing play. However, it does see play with Connectivity, which allows you to basically get 3 Ragnaroses on the board. And yeah, that enabled for some combos in Nature Shaman, where yeah, Connectivity cost often 0, and then you got mana back with the weapon. And it was pretty easy to get 3 Ragnaroses on board while clearing the opponent's board, and yeah, that usually won the game. It's pretty close. Is a niche tier because yeah, it's not played in a lot of decks, but I think I've seen it in more decks as well. So I think I'm gonna put barely in good tier because it helped out the deck. It's pretty close. It's a difficult one. It's not played in a lot of decks, I guess. I guess I should put it in this tier. I think it's good in the decks it's in, right? Helps you win the slower matchups. But I think overall, yeah, it's not played in enough decks that to really go in the good tier. And then we have Symphony of Sins, and yeah, this was originally 6 mana. The 6th theme in this kind of got ruined by buffing it, but yeah, this is kind of what made it playable. You see it in a lot of Warlock decks, and it's overall pretty versatile. But overall, I don't think it really breaks any of them. It's just a solid card in all those decks, and yep, so I think it fits in the good tier. Now, the next we have the Stranglethorn Heart, a hunting card that, yeah, it used to be 10 mana and then it got buffed to 8 mana, but still, it hasn't really seen play a lot since then. I did see play in in Renathal Hunter, I believe, back when it was one of the best decks, even the best decks for a while. But I think it since then it really hasn't seen much play. So, well, yeah, the deck was pretty good. I think I'm gonna put it in the niche tier. It requires you to play slower beast than Hunter, and yeah, just hasn't been too good. So that's why I'm gonna put it in the niche tier. Next up, we have Climactic Necrotic Explosion, a 10 mana card, and I think this got buffed a couple of times even. But yeah, its current version, it doesn't even see play right now in Rainbow Death Knight, but it did see a bit of play before. It might see play again later on if the meta slows down a bit. So yeah, I think it belongs in the niche tier. Yeah, all those buffs, it's still barely playable, but yeah, it shows it really needed those buffs. Now next up we have the Badlands Bandits, and I'll admit I've tried this card out in like a Highlander Paladin, but yeah, overall it was pretty mediocre and just not really worth it because it required you to have a full hand for this to work. Like the cards you got, the 3/2s in your hand, not really worth it. And then next up we have the Wheel of Death, and yeah, well technically this card got nerfed. I think it was more just making the card do what it said on the text, because before the nerf it was only 4 turns. So yeah, it's kind of hard to say. Like, I feel like it just didn't function before the nerf how it should have been. But yeah, it's 5 mana. It's not seeing a lot of play. I know some people got legend with it. So yeah, I think it's just barely playable right now at this form, which it kind of was meant to be. So I'm going to put it in niche tier because I think that's where it belongs. And then we have the most recent card, the Galactic Projection Orb for Mage. And yeah, Mage got a lot of these legendary spells. After all, it's a caster Mage, so it makes sense they get a lot of these spells. But yeah, this Orb, it never really saw play. Like, big spell Mage, they've buffed it a bit, they've given it some tools, but recently it hasn't worked. It worked before, a couple of years ago with Belinda, but yeah, the current version, yeah, just too slow, just too inconsistent. And yeah, this card just hasn't been good at all. So yeah, I think, yeah, well, maybe in the future it might move up a bit when maybe it gets more support. It just isn't playable right now. So, well, I can only put it in the unplayable tier then. Now, that is it for the tier list. Pretty even spread out outside of the broken tier. I guess there weren't too many broken cards, although some of these cards, I guess, were broken in for some periods. But overall, I'd say pretty even. And yeah, thank you for making it all the way through to the end. Let me know down below in the comments what you disagree or agree with. Thank you for watching, and until next time.